Come on.
All right, I'm recording. Go ahead.
Hello, patrons, and welcome to Wisdom Wednesday. Today, we're going to be going deep into Bill's brain. How do I integrate NPCs into the campaign? Okay, a number of you patrons of the minor deity level or higher have qualified at your pledge level to submit NPCs to the game. Now, my directions have been pretty loose because I like to leave the options to you. After all, you are supporting me being able to continue doing programming, and I want you to have fun with it as well. So my basic directions were create an NPC. It could be a minor character, major character. You could make it like a character sheet almost, or you could just give me a loose description. This could be an ally or a foe or something in between. And I leave it pretty open-ended. And I've gotten some really cool submissions. So on today's Wisdom Wednesday, what I wanted to do was go through the submissions and then share my thought process with you guys as a DM. How do you take a concept for an NPC and flesh it out and make it something that you're going to integrate into your game? And that includes like a lot of different factors. So part of this exercise is for me to share that with you guys, and maybe this wisdom will be beneficial when you are DMing your own games, or even if you're playing in a game, but you're playing like a pre-made character, like a pre-gen. How do you get into that character? How do you personify that character? How do you make that character your own? So whether it's from the DM perspective or the player perspective, I think the process is similar. But we're going to go through this exercise together for another reason, because I actually don't think about it. I don't really analyze what I do. I just do it because I've been doing it so long that I don't think about it anymore. So I think it's a good exercise for me also to be able to kind of think about my process and share that with you. So anyway, hopefully this episode will be wisdomful. So I'm going to start off not in any order because a few of you guys have had your NPCs into me for a really long time, but I'm just going to start at the top of the list in just however Google Docs puts this together. So the first NPC I'm opening up was submitted by Topo, and this is for the character Kat Kalaruk. So Kat found herself on the streets as a young child. She survived thanks to an older girl who befriended her and taught her how to survive. Through much trial and error, she learned to pick pockets and commit other petty theft. She was well suited to such a vocation and fell in with the local thieves guild, from whom she received formal training in other roguish arts. All right, so already, I don't know about you guys, but when I read something like that kind of backgrounds, I'm already getting a picture in my head. I haven't gone through to see if Topo provided me with a physical description yet, but I'm already kind of getting a picture in my head. I'm imagining those scenes that were described of like a young child kind of, and this also immediately in my brain, urchin background, right? That's a great background to fit this character. The class would probably be rogue. And I'm imagining this child, this human child. So let's continue though. Today, Kat is an arcane trickster whose spells are primarily focused on misdirection and escaping a situation. She has expeditious retreat instead of mage armor, for example. She's adept at disguising herself, both physically using a disguise kit and magically using disguise self, and via her acting skills, which enable her to mimic others. She has trained herself to read lips and uses that in her day job to eavesdrop on the conversations of tavern patrons and find potential marks. Oh, that's so cool. That's awesome. So here's inside of Bill's brain. Ready? We should create some graphic that's like a super zoom inside of Bill's brain, and then it turns into like a swirl of ideas and concepts where I have a voiceover with like echoes. No, that's too much work. Dave says, which is just a big no.
And then it could go, oh, it's okay.
It's okay. You could just play the character. So what I'm thinking as I'm reading the second paragraph is Kat is what I would call a neutral NPC. She's neither an ally nor an enemy initially. What I love about that is it puts the ball back into the court of the party. How do they interact with Cat? So let's say they're suspicious of Cat, and then they get aggressive with Cat and they threaten Cat. Now they're making an enemy. But Cat could also be a great ally. Cat could also be kind of a casual contact who they get information from, but then, then they kind of part their ways. And then maybe later on they need some kind of criminal underworld, street level, streetwise info, and they go back to Cat. So she could be like a recurring character in a city where they're based. Okay, she tries to pick bars and taverns which have at least one other barmaid who she's a reasonable visual match to. Then when it works, she tries to make herself appear as much like the other barmaid as possible. You never know when a claim of misidentification could come in handy. While working, she comes across as agreeable but somewhat ditzy and naive, always appearing surprised when a customer pulls her onto his lap. Of course, when it happens, he often discovers later that he has misplaced his coin purse. That's awesome. Her high charisma and expertise in deception allows her to talk her way out of most tight situations, and she'll always choose to flee rather than fight if given any opportunity to do so. That's fantastic. From an NPC perspective, I think that's awesome. It creates a sense of longevity. She's a survivor, and she realizes that you can't fight your way out of everything, and that fighting often leads to injury, and injury can lead to death. So I love that she's about self-preservation versus, winning a fight or winning an argument or even winning a prize maybe. Maybe if for some reason her sleight of hand doesn't work and she gets caught, she'll bounce versus trying to fight her way out. Pickpocketing is usually how she earns her living, though she isn't above burglaring rooms if she has some inside information, nor is she averse to selling information if the opportunity presents itself and has taken on odd spying jobs in the past. So again, she could be a great NPC resource to a party who maybe needs information. They kind of, it's like, in the movies when somebody's like, I have a connection, and then they go to somebody and they pay that person off, and then a little bit later they get some information back, right? It's that streetwise NPC that can help the party find out stuff about certain things. They're not going to necessarily go to her and be like, we're looking for the lost artifact of Shazam, and we can't seem to find any record of it in the temple. Well, why would a streetwise person know about some religious artifact? I mean, maybe she would. Maybe someone stole it and sold it, and she could find out who the fence is. Anyway. One scenario could be where she learns a customer has something of value and is sitting with some companions in the tavern having a private conversation. She would use the message cantrip to whisper a message to him, mimicking one of his companions, saying, "We're being watched." Then a bit later, when the character is alert, looking for anyone watching them, she uses her invisible mage hand to pull a chair slightly away from a table near the door, even though no one's sitting in it. Then a few moments later, uses it to open the front door and close it again. If the character jumps to the conclusion that some invisible person was watching them, then leaving and gives chase, Cat is in a position to be in the way, so she's bumped into as they rush to the door, and uses that as cover to pickpocket the character. Once they get outside, she could use minor illusion, perhaps cast just before the mage hand, to have the sound of running footsteps around a corner from the door to drag out the deception a little further. That is truly exemplary. So not only has Topo provided a very interesting character to play with that offers flexibility. She could be a friend, she could be an enemy, she could be a neutral resource person, a contact, but even a sample for how she could be integrated. And that actually skips an entire portion of my thinking process, because I could take that idea and apply that, like post-haste, really easily. Yeah, I could see this being a great NPC. Now, the question is, to what party is she going to be linked? Is she going to be connecting with Jenny and Jordan's group? Would she connect with Beth's group? Or in another way? So the other thing that I got from Topo was a sample character sheet, which is helpful. Not necessary, as I pointed out to my patrons of the minor deity level or higher, but helpful for me from a DM perspective to look at the mechanics so that I can kind of peer inside of your mind to see what you were thinking. Sometimes there's details that will help. So, for example, the proficiencies that were explained in the writing are pretty clearly spelled out here in the sheet with regard to acrobatics, deception, perception, performance, persuasion, sleight of hand, and stealth being the most prominent ones in which she is proficient. And honestly, the build is not anything super massive. I mean, it's pretty much a straight point by kind of system here. The one dump stat is strength of 9, which is not a big deal. Pretty good dexterity of 16, pretty good intelligence, which makes sense. She's got to be pretty quick thinking to be able to kind of stay on her toes and not get caught off guard, not get arrested, not get caught, etc. The typical basic rogue things are here. Everything that you would imagine. Pretty light on weapons because, again, she prefers to use the social skills and her thinking and her evasive capabilities. The disguise component is there. The Arcane Trickster rendering the ability to use the Mage Hand Legerdemain. Uncanny Dodge. The feat of Actor, which I think is great, and also the feat of Observant. So that explains now, that makes sense. That explains why she doesn't have high ability scores, because as a variant human at level 1, you can get a feat. So that would explain the Actor feat. And then at level 4, when you'd normally get an ability score improvement, rather she would have had the Observant feat. That's the lip reading one, among other benefits. So great additional kind of details to the concept. And again, just to confirm my initial suspicion, just reading the intro for the background, Topo did in fact choose Urchin as the background. Okay, so now to think through out loud, to think through the integration of cat. Oh, and he has spells written down here too. Mage Hand Message, Minor Illusion, Sleep, Disguise Self, Color Spray, Expeditious Retreat. All great. Okay, so I'm thinking about cat as I've got a couple options for how to integrate cat. There's nothing firmly in this concept that says she has to be locked into one city. Let's go through the pros and cons. If she's in one city, she probably knows more about that city than other places, if that's her home base. It also means that the characters would have a way maybe to find her. Now, she doesn't stay working at the same taverns, but maybe there's some system that she has, like leave a copper coin with an X scratched into it near the fountain in the market plaza. I don't know. But, maybe there's some way of getting hold of her. All right. Now, on the flip, what if she's not part of a major city, but she moves constantly? That would also work because maybe she kind of moves seasonally, So she never stays in one town or city too long because there's always a chance of the authorities catching wind of her activities. She doesn't want to get thrown in jail. So she stays in town, earns some coin, finds out some stuff, gets some secrets together, moves to the next town. And maybe that kind of nomadic lifestyle keeps her connected to a bunch of different cities and towns and other networks within those cities and towns, like gangs, small thieves guilds, large thieves guilds, whatever. So she's got connections spread out all over a given kingdom or region even. That might also work. Now, specific to season 4, with parties who are on the move all the time, maybe that nomadic lifestyle for Cat would work best, because they can encounter her initially in some town, and how they interact with her will affect her relationship with them. If they're friendly, if they're businesslike and professional, she'll maintain good relations with them. If for some reason they're murder hobo-ish and foolish and they try to betray her, maybe she'll see to it that, they run into trouble themselves. Using her network of contacts, she can make life challenging for them. Not necessarily like, I'll kill you, like she's going to hunt them down like an assassin, because that's not her style. But depending on the grievance that they've placed on her, if it's something truly grievous and they sabotaged her in some way or tried to attack her outright, something like that, she could use her network of contacts to kind of, have gangs steal things from them, bandits, thieves guilds, whatever. But let's say that they're friendly or at least neutral. Maybe there's a way that, her nomadic schedule will work with them. And I don't mean like traveling companion. I don't see her necessarily joining the group, but I see her kind of running into the group periodically. So I think that's kind of more of a usable vibe, because it means that she's not just locked to like one city. And if the party leaves that city and they never come back, then we'd never see this NPC. So I kind of think it'd be cool to have her be kind of more nomadic. And I also think the rationale of her kind of always staying one step ahead of the law makes sense. How does she encounter people, though? How does she run into people? And what's her motivation for staying friendly with the party? Maybe in this whole like eavesdropping and lip reading thing, she realizes that the party's involved in something important, or maybe has access to great powerful things that could be worth a lot of money, and she sees an opportunity to kind of buy herself a future of comfort and luxury that she previously had not thought of. And so that's her kind of key to working with the group and being willing to work with them, is that she sees opportunity there. She'd like to retire, and live in luxury and not have to pick pockets and work in taverns all the time. So maybe this is like her big lottery ticket. This Coke Zero break brought to you by you, my patrons. Which party should run into Cat? That I have to sort out. I could see her working really well with Beth's party, being like another female confidant who they could go to when they kind of need that street info. So yeah, I think that's cool. I think there's a lot of potential there. All right, and the next one, this one comes from Erik, and this is Sulfured Matronus. Sulfured Matronus is a human bard. She has been a dancer in the public market of Barrett Lout. Oh, I like that. So she would be in the kingdom of Malakun. Prior to that, she was a member of a wealthy family of actors from far away. Entertainer background, bard-like abilities centered around performing, singing, and dancing. Appearance, slender, tan-skinned, pale blue hair. She's missing her pointer finger on her left hand and a long scar on her right cheek. Scar, pointer finger, okay. Abilities, she would have a high constitution and a high charisma and a low wisdom and low strength. Her mannerism, she often makes references to deities that no one recognizes. Less frequently, she stares longingly into the distance at things that are not visible to others, and sometimes she squints. Interesting. Very ambiguous descriptions. The hamsters in my brain are going crazy, running around with ideas. All right, personality, honest and curious. Okay. Useful knowledge, knows planes and regions outside of New Ofotmai. She knows that they exist. Ooh. Ideals. She values individual freedoms, respects all creatures, large and small. Her bonds, she protects a large gem from her homeland. Flaw or secret, she is not from New Otmai, but from some other region or plane. She will not openly reveal this, but it should be subtle. Okay. I see what you did there, Erik. You want to play with the lore. The lore! I like it. The blue hair thing has got me ruined, though. I can immediately think of a great way to integrate her, but not with blue hair. So there's a ethnic group of humans on the continent of Arakazine in my original homeworld called the Suineist. And the Suineist are basically gypsies, to use a hopefully not offensive word. They're nomadic peoples, okay? And they're nomadic peoples with a strong sense of history and genealogy and a very distinct culture. And they are travelers for a number of reasons. Number one, they travel all over Arakazine, but number two, they have traveled to other continents, defying some of the physical and magical barriers. So, could Sulfured Matronus be one of the Suineist? Yes, she could, which would explain her secret that she's not from New Otmai. But if she's on New Otmai, that means she can't get back. Now, why would I say this? I don't want to spoil it for you, but she can't get back. All of these other descriptors that Erik provided perfectly fit with the Suineist. The tanned skin. The fact that she stares longingly into the distance because maybe she's thinking about her homeland. Maybe she's thinking about Arakazine. The fact that she's honest and curious. Those are like traits that are fundamentally part of the Suineist culture. They can be deceptive and tricky and tricksy, but they are, when they're amongst those who they trust, they're very honest to a point almost of fault. Like they'll be like, it looks like you're getting a little bit fat. You should lay off some of the bread. They'll just, like, there's no filter, so they just say whatever they want. And they are curious. They're curious people. So all of those things that Erik provided really do fit. Oh, also, the valuing of individual freedom is a huge thing. Like, they don't bend the knee to any government. They don't pay taxes. They respect all creatures, large and small. They're very tied to nature. They respect nature. They're not wasteful. And then this part where she protects a large gem from her homeland. You guys should know that there's an easy way for me to make the significance of that gem work. It could very easily be a godstone, an elemental crystal. So really the question is if she's one of the Suineist, she's not going to open up about that to anyone right away, at least, not unless she really trusts them. And then does that create a story arc where the party wants to help her get back home? And will she reveal things about Arakazine? Next time on, yeah. So this is great. This is great. And Erik just provided this document. But as a DM, I'm thinking through how I can integrate this character. Okay, so the obvious setup is the party would encounter her in some festival or fair or in the Market Plaza Square, something like that. Maybe one of the party members would be attracted to her, or maybe just appreciate her dancing and singing skills, and then like try to, carouse and have a drink with her, blah, blah, blah. But that's small talk. How do they really integrate her into the party? One way is to notice that maybe there's more to her than what meets the eye. It could be the presence of the crystal. Maybe they see this crystal dangling around her neck. that's tucked into her scarves, but while she's dancing, it kind of peeks out, and they're like, oh, right? And then somebody does a detect magic, and they're like, it's just oozing magic. Maybe. Or maybe she's more careful. She's got it covered up, wrapped up in something, so it's not the crystal that they notice, but it's something about her manner of speech. Like she speaks common, but it's kind of a broken common. And she doesn't speak Elvish or Dwarvish or any of the other racial languages, because those races don't exist on a Rakazine. Maybe somebody in that party has some object with runes or writing from a Rakazine, and maybe she would recognize them, and they'd be like, how do you know what that is? And then she'd be kind of sly about it at first, and then if they build up a rapport with her, then she would maybe reveal that she came to that continent. Now, how did she come to that continent? I don't want to spoil it for you guys, but I have some ideas. I'll say this. There is a way to get to New Ophotmi from other continents. But each one of those ways are extremely rare and extremely difficult to achieve. And invariably, they are a one-way ticket. In other words, if you make it, you're not coming back. There's no return trip home. You're on New Ophotmi, that's where you are. So I could figure out a way in the story, and I'm thinking now out loud, that she's actually part of a family that was separated when New Ophotmi was created. And so her family took this crystal that had been in their family for a long time and found the right place and the right time for her to be able to go to New Ophotmi. I think this is a great concept. For right now, I see her working pretty well with maybe Beth's group. No, I feel like I have this trend going where all the female characters are going to Beth's group. It could go either way, but I would say Beth's group would have a better story connection to somebody who was from a Rakazine. Okay. The next one is Trizzle. So Trizzle was sent to me by Tricky Troy. And Trizzle has an extensive backstory. With Trizzle, it's not a lack of explanation. There's a ton of explanation. But Troy was very clear with me that he didn't want me to share everything because there are things in the backstory that will create spoilers. So I don't want to ruin Troy's work with Trizzle. But I will say that Trizzle is a character who represents the best that you could look for in an NPC, because he is both comedy and tragedy. He is the two faces of theatrical plane. He's a sad character and yet full of comedy as well. So I won't give you too much information, but I will say this. Trizzle is a tiefling with stunted growth. And his horns have been basically shaved down to just nubs. When the party encounters him, he will be enslaved. Whether the party chooses to free him or not, and whether they choose to bring him into their family or not, is another story. They may just choose to free him and grant him his freedom, and then they never see him again. What I like to think of with Trizzle is a little bit, and I don't want anybody to take this the wrong way, but there's a little element of Dobby, the house elf from the Harry Potter books. There's a lot of that reminds me of Trizzle. Like, here's someone who's basically been a slave and a victim for much of his life. And when somebody shows him compassion, and then beyond compassion shows him like love or respect, he's so completely moved that he's like wrecked emotionally. And he becomes a devoted servant and friend of those who showed him compassion and gave him freedom. There's also a little bit of Gollum from The Lord of the Rings, Sméagol and Gollum, that I think of with Trizzle. There's a certain duality to Trizzle, who he really is deep down, his nature versus his demeanor. His demeanor comes off as being kind of a trickster. But who he really is deep down is kind of a sad person. And in that same sense of duality, I see some similarities between Sméagol and Gollum. Now, I will share this because I don't think it's spoilers, but I want to share with you the getting into character part, okay? Because I've read and reread Trizzle's information that Troy sent me numerous times. And I've struggled to think of how I want to personify this character. When I'm acting him out, what do I want to do? And I've kind of narrowed it down to a couple influences. So first of all, I think I want, with keeping in mind the duality component, I kind of want Trizzle to speak like in the third person, like speak of himself. So if they're interacting and they're like, Trizzle, which way should we go? He might be like, Trizzle isn't sure where to go. Trizzle's never been here before. Trizzle would be happy to scout that way, though, if you will it. So I kind of see him speaking of himself in that third person sense. All right, the voice. Part of me wanted to do like a Sméagol Gollum thing, but I also think that like I kind of imagined Trizzle's voice being like if you took a 12-year-old boy who was just going through puberty and he smoked 3 packs of Marlboros a day for a couple of years, what would that kid's voice sound like? So I kind of came up with this voice where it's like this and it's a little bit scratchy and nasal. But this is what Trizzle would speak like in my mind. So that's kind of how I'm thinking about how to personify Trizzle. There's a lot of great character, like mental explanations, like how Trizzle would think or react to certain things in here that Troy's provided. And as a DM, you guys, when you're investing in an NPC who you think might be a recurring character or join the party or even an enemy, it's important to think of how they would react. It's important to think of how that NPC would interact with certain situations and how they would react to certain social interactions. How would they react to being lied to, So let's say that there's some interaction happening and, some member of the party is going to lie to Trizzle about something. Be like, no, Trizzle, we're not going to rob that bank at all. And Trizzle makes the insight check. Is Trizzle going to call them out on it? Is he going to be like, you lie, you don't speak the truth? Or is Trizzle going to say, as you will it? So even though he knows that they're lying and their idea is a bad idea, he just reluctantly goes along and he's sad. I think it would be the latter. I think he would reluctantly go along and be sad. But maybe if it was deadly, he would fight for the truth and he would try to advise his newfound friends to not do something dangerous, and he would plead with them and show emotion. So there's a lot of depth in the potential for an NPC. And I think the other thing too is, as a DM, I try to play the NPCs with some depth. Not all of them. I mean, it's not possible. You can't have every guard in a town have a fully fleshed out story. You'd go crazy. But the NPCs that you feel like are going to be recurring characters, if you give them a little bit of something, facial expressions, voices, But that's still superficial. I think what really matters is how they interact with the party. And that's the role-playing part. It's the acting part. How do you act that character out so that the party distinctly knows who that character is? And you have to be consistent. You have to be consistent because once you achieve that, the party will know right away, not just by voice, but the party will know right away by the consistency with which you have role-played that NPC. And they'll be able to immerse themselves in the gaming experience. That's hugely important. And I'll tell you as a player, when I've played in people's campaigns where like every NPC is just the DM talking, there's no like variation in their mannerisms or the voice or anything or their posture. You know, I think that's important. Even posture, that's a great example, you know? So if I want to play like some fat merchant, I'll be like, well, greetings. You know, I'll come up with some voice and my posture will be like this. And, you know, or if I want to play some sniveling kind of goblin or kobold or maybe even trizzle, I'll have like bad posture and I'll be like leaning forward and, you know. So, I mean, those little things, those little mannerisms and those little affects that you provide all help flesh out the playing of that NPC, which I think it just creates a better environment at the table. Calderas is an NPC that DoD Spec Ops came up with for me to use, and he is definitely what I would call a neutral. Remember earlier when I was saying there are some NPCs who are going to be like allies, some that are going to be enemies, and some that are neutral. Calderas is going to be a neutral because it very much depends on how the party interacts with him, whether or not he will join them or go against them. So above all, he's a variant human folk hero fighter. Okay, so this is the kind of NPC who, if you watched like Beauty and the Beast in any version, you know that there's like Gaston, right? And Gaston's like kind of the good-looking, you know, would-be hero, right? And he's beefy and brawn, and he's a great hunter, and he's a great fighter, and he's handsome and charismatic, and all the girls love him, right? Except for Belle. She doesn't like him at all. But I think Calderas could be a Gaston without being a dick. He could be a genuine folk hero. So what DoD gave me was a character sheet and then background information that kind of explains a little bit about him. And one of the things about him is that, you know, he was successfully able to achieve the 4 tasks of Gorn. And these were like kind of, you know, Herculean sort of tasks where he had to defeat certain monsters, yada, yada, yada. So all of that is provided. So really all I have to do is figure out at what point does Calderas run into these people and how will he interact with them. So let's look at the personality traits. When I set my mind to something, I follow through no matter what gets in my way. That totally fits with the hunter, folklore, hero, fighter, right? He's decided to join the party, and, you know, come hell or high water, they'll find that troll nest and flush out those trolls once and for all, or whatever it is. Ideals, destiny, nothing and no one can steer me away from my higher calling. Bonds, I protect those who cannot protect themselves. And flaws, I have a weakness for the vices of the city, especially hard drink. Yay. Okay, so I like all of those things. The rest of the character sheet's pretty full of good choices. The fact that he's a remarkable athlete, he gets that feat at his... He as a fighter, he's got all the fighter stuff that goes with being a champion. He's a remarkable athlete. He's got great dexterity, strength, and constitution. And his dump stats are intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. So maybe he's not cocky and full of himself. He's just more like a straight ahead, no funny business, you know, kind of serious guy. A nomad, a huntsman, Calderas he is called. No nonsense, 24-year-old human male, maybe he's a little older. Previous occupation is unknown. His story is as secretive as a prized jewel hidden in a musty old tower. He wanders around from town to town, city to city, a hired gun. No job is too small. He has a great track record of his fabled deeds in all the towns or cities he has performed. So here's a great opportunity to think out loud and analyze this. Calderas could be neutral initially, right? The party meets him. Whether they like him and how respectfully they treat him will depend on which direction he goes in. So let's say that he becomes an ally and they're like, we have this thing that we need to do and it's going to be dangerous. We could use some extra fighting capacity. And then they negotiate some split of the treasure and he agrees to go with them and he will be faithful. And by his word, he's a man of his word and he will be faithful to the party. Right? And let's say they work together and they go on the adventure and they slay all the monsters and they get all the treasure. He'll take his cut and respectfully bid them adieu and he'll leave unless they keep him on, retainer or something like that. But here's how this could go bad too. Let's say they insult him or disrespect him in some way, or they try to backstab him. They hire him for a deal and they try to screw him out of the treasure cut. He will now become like the worst bounty hunter that they could ever imagine. And he will stop at nothing to get what's owed to him and to get his revenge. So this is a perfect neutral NPC. Because if they screw with him or things go sideways, he's going to set things straight. So I very much like that. And the other thing I very much like about Calderas is I could see him going with either of the parties, with the Jenny and Jordan group or with Beth's group. So there's some flexibility there. One more thing, back to Trizzle. I struggled and I'm still struggling actually, thinking about what group would be the best one to have encounter Trizzle. And I think what I've come to is Jenny and Jordan's group. And the reason why is Jenny and Jordan's group is a little less murder hobo-y and more lawful, and I think more compassionate. I think they're more inclined to run into somebody like Trizzle and want to help him. Whereas I think Beth's group might be too busy and too focused on their own agenda to stop and help someone like Trizzle. So I also think Trizzle, just as a misfit of sorts, might fit in better with Jenny and Jordan's party. Because Jenny and Jordan's party definitely has quite a group of diverse people. They have Goliaths and Asamar and so Tieflings. So I think that'll be a better fit for Trizzle. But the other NPCs that you guys have submitted so far, I could see going either way. They're very flexible. My gut instinct initially with the first two female NPCs was that they would be a good fit to work with Beth's group, but that remains to be seen. So overall, I think that part of the challenge of using someone else's material is making it your own. So in my exercise to make all of these things my own, I have read through everything, and then I've thought about it, and I've simmered on it, and I've compared it. In my brain, I've run through scenarios. How would Calderas work with this group? How would Calderas work with this group? What if they met him in a city? What if they met him on a road? And the same thing with all the other NPCs. I tried to think of different scenarios in which the party would encounter these NPCs and how they would interact. And then I try to come up with personification. I try to come up with everything, mannerisms, posture, voices, anything to kind of distinguish each of these NPCs so that when I'm acting them out, they truly become different characters. And the more consistent you are with that, the more immersive your environment at the table will be. And the more your players at the table will really get into and care for or hate these NPCs. When you've done something good when your party has become emotionally invested in an NPC, when they actually care about an NPC, whether they like that NPC or they hate that NPC. If they actually have some kind of emotional connection, you have succeeded in your job as a DM in role-playing that NPC. So I hope this little tour through your submissions for NPCs and my analysis of how to work with them has been interesting and full of wisdom. And thank you guys, as always, for your incredible, humbling support, honestly. You guys are the reason why the train is rolling, and we have a lot of awesome content coming at you. Double the original amount of content that I used to do on this channel, and that is 100% because of Patreon and your support. So thank you guys so much, and we will see you next week. Peace.